sponsored by Squarespace.
I've saved so much money buying miniatures off eBay, and sometimes they arrive looking like this. But most of the time, they show up actually looking quite well painted, but they do have room for improvement. With just minor adjustments, I'm sure we can make them look like $1 million. So today, I'm going to give you all of the secrets to make your miniatures go from this, 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 and this to something like this. So we got 4 second-hand purchased miniatures. Which one do you want to start with?
I think I'm gonna start with this one.
Nice.
Sister of Battles.
Good choice. I think if you go small, I'm gonna go even smaller. Let's do the blue horror. The main problem I've found on miniatures I've purchased on eBay is that most of them lack focus, meaning that they are either too bland on all areas or too out there on all areas. So it's difficult for your eyes to put focus on what's important on the miniatures. Quite often as well, they don't pop from the table. And we're gonna fix that. This specific Sister of Battle is well painted, but it's far too dark and it lacks saturation. So we're going to add some focal points to make this one really shine on the gaming table. And we need to add that on the most important parts, the weapon and the face. So Lucas, start with something simple.
So I'm gonna add some Flesh Terror Red to bring some saturation and some really nice colors. And then once I've added the contrast paints, I'm gonna use Evil Sun Scarlet and then some Light Flesh to sort of add these reflective small little highlights and still try to keep the moody, dark, grimy style, but try to bring up the light values a little bit. So the next step of this mini is the face. Starting off with the sort of shadowy color, I'm gonna mix some Doombull Brown with some Cadian Flesh, and 50-50 that creates a really nice base shadow skin tone. So I'll be using the face painting techniques from this video. We're using the colors Kislev Flesh, Cadian Flesh Tone, and some Light Flesh. So you can see it's already starting to look amazing and we're only 30 minutes in now. So let's make the second most important part of a mini look amazing, the weapon. And in this case, it's a power whip. So I began by covering everything with warp lightning and then adding some ivory coming out from the handle with the core and then adding some highlights on top of the whip. Then using the airbrush and glazing together with some fluorescent green. And this is what makes the glow effect so amazing. So the last 15 minutes I spent adding highlights to the already existing paint job, adding some small details on the robe, on the rocks. And as the final detail, I'm adding some iron oxide pigment to the base to really make the base killer. And with that, miniature number 1 is done and it's time for the grand reveal.
Okay, it's time for my first miniature of the day. This blue horror is well painted, but it does lack a little bit of contrast, it lacks volume and saturation. So that's gonna be the main focus on this miniature. So I start off by clipping the miniature off the base, and I do this to be able to spray the miniature with the airbrush from below. And I use the contrast paint Achillean green through the airbrush on everything that's not angled towards the sky. With that, we have a nice shaded foundation. The next step is to glaze in some highlights. Because this one is quite gray in the highlights, I'm glazing in with some green blue on all of the raised areas. Making sure that all of the highlights are perfectly placed, especially around the face area and the upper part of his shoulder where we want the focus to be drawn. To make the skin a 10 out of 10, I'm mixing in some ivory to that blue-green. And it's super important to place the highlights all the way up on each of the different parts, otherwise it's just gonna look like lonely islands, and we don't want that. The teeth on this bad boy were a little bit sloppily painted, so I'm going to cover all of them with Wildwood contrast paint. I'm then using the color Japanese Uniform and mixing in some ivory to that for each step of highlight I do on all of the teeth, and make sure that I do these properly, because again, the face is such a focal point. We want to make sure that everything looks perfect. And the flames on my personal blue horse is green. So I'm gonna cover up the flames with Warp Lightning. I'm then using the same technique that Lucas did on his whip, using ivory and then fluorescent green. And of course doing the same with the eyes. The last thing I'm gonna paint on this miniature is the tongue. It's just flat pink. It's not bad, it's just flat. So I'm going to glaze some dark magenta on the entire tongue, and then re-adding some of that magenta on the top of the tongue and some ivory to add the final details. So the painting is finalized, but the base is just plain sand. So I'm using a drop of Airbrush Flow Improver on the base, and then going in with yellow ochre pigments on the entire thing, make it really look like a desert. If I want, I can add some dried grass tufts on there, and the miniature is done. I guess it's reveal time!
Man, I really think we nailed these guys, helping them look awesome and really rescuing these two.
It's such a quick job. I feel like the sister just, the pop is different.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a completely different model, but it's still the same foundation, so...
Yeah, and vibe. The blue horror is just more blue horror-y. Yeah, it fits my army, so I'm super happy. But now we have two big guys. Do you want to see what you can do on 1 hour on the biggest of the big guys? Or do you want to do the more detailed guy?
Yeah, I'm gonna take this one.
Okay, so I guess it's greatest of unclean ones for me, and
Ogroid.
Ogroid, the drummer purge.
Flame Boy.
But first it's
Grand.
Squarespace ad. There will be no silly laptop waving or programming languages in this classroom, is that understood? Mr. Squarey Squarespace, our new celebrity. Which programming languages do you know?
None of them.
Tell me again, Mr. Squarey, which programming language would make this website look better?
None of them.
Oh, is that so?
Yes, why make it more complicated than it needs to be? With Squarespace award-winning templates, you can make awesome-looking websites without any knowledge.
Silence! Squarespace.
But Professor, if you go to squarespace.com/Squidmar and enter Squidmar, you get 10% off and 14 days free trial.
So the Ogroid is quite well painted, but it's just kind of a base coat and a wash. So I'm gonna add a bit of volume, contrast, and really punch the saturation for the whole piece. So just like with the blue horror, I'm gonna remove the Ogroids from the base, and then using the airbrush and some Achillean green, adding some shadows to the entire model. And then from above, slightly adding some ethermatic blue just to sort of tint the entire piece to a more turquoise tone than the grayish blue tone. Of course, you can do this with a regular brush, just thin down the paint and glaze into the shadows. It's quite simple. In the chest area and face area where we want the most focus, I'm gonna start adding some highlights. I'm gonna do this using mainly blue-green and then slightly adding some sunny skin tone to the mix. And in the face area, I'm using some Caucasian skin tones like Kislev flesh and pale flesh. So the hair and the flame of the Mini is a bit unevenly painted, so I'm gonna recover the entire area with Flesh Terror Red. And instead of adding the highlight, the brightest point on top of the hair, I'm actually gonna make it sort of glowing like a flame of sorts. So I'm gonna use some ivory and add it from the lower side just like you do with regular flames. And then I'm gonna use some luminous orange through the airbrush to sort of glaze it together, creating this super nice blend and a really hot spot. It's gonna look like flames. For the flames, I can do the same thing. Very nice. Regarding all the bones and wood parts of the Mini, I'm using wildwood to shade down it all and then adding some slight highlight, using Steel Legion Drab, using some Deathclaw Brown and different red browns from different brands. So you might have noticed that the big part of this Ogroid dude is covered in these big runes, and I think it's gonna look a little bit weird if we just ignore them. So I'm just gonna highlight them using the same tone as we did for the skin, but slightly brighter so it's looking more like scars. Just more like a cleanup than actually repainting it. Topping everything off, I'm just copying Emil, doing the same steps he did for his base, because it's gonna be in the same army as the Blue Horror, so they need to look the same. So that's how I went from this to this in just an hour.
Okay, it's time for the big last one, the chunky boy, Mr. Great and Clean one. And this entire miniature is mostly like a big base coat and a wash. And of course, in all of the gory parts, there's a lot of special effects like the glossy, gooey green and the blood effects. And it would be ridiculous to expect me to be able to paint something to like a competition standard in an hour on this size, but that's not what this video is about. It's about bringing out the strengths of a paint job that's already done and making it look better in an hour, not making it look the best you've ever seen in an hour. So let's again start off by just popping the miniature off its base. This way we can shade using my favorite color, Rhinox Hide, as well as an olive green from below, adding it generally to all of the big shapes under all of the love handles and under all of the chins and big belly parts and under his arms that he's holding up. Nothing that's angled upwards is gonna be shaded, only stuff that's down where the shadow would be. And the second thing that I want to do is to draw the attention to the face. We keep repeating this, but the face is so important. There is something that's distracting me, and that's the hood thing that he's got. It's a pink that kind of clashes with the green tone we have. So I'm going to add Flesh Terror Red again over the entire thing, highlight that up with Wild Rider Red, and using Light Flesh for the final highlight. And around the face area and belly area, I want to bring in some of that variation. So I'm gonna use a dark rosy skin tone, just covering a big part of the entire face area. And having that leak a little bit on the rest of the body as well. Then highlighting that up with Pale Flesh and Light Flesh again, just like Lucas did in the face of his Ogroid. The horns and the staff just blends together a little bit too much with the skin tone. Everything sort of has the same saturation and light value, so they kind of don't separate from each other. So I'm going to use the airbrush again, shade some of the staff and the horns, especially on the outside of the horns, so that when you look on it, more of the focus is drawn to the center where the face is. Any last minutes I had, I added more highlights to the center and the front of his body. So around the belly area, the front of his arms and hands and things like that. Obviously, again, I didn't have time to finish the entire thing. If I had 2 hours, I would have loved to add some more detail and refine the tentacle and the bloody, gory parts as well to make them look more reflective and stuff. And I feel like I'm really happy. I guess I gotta show you guys. So it's time for a grand reveal. That was fun.
Yeah.
We have some painted minis that's even more painted. It's great. If you want to thank someone that we showed you guys all our secret hidden techniques, thank the Patreons, because they are the ones that make sure that my salary is paid every month. Thank you guys so much. Special thanks to the top ones. They're even more insane. For real, insane. And now it's a rolling time for more awesome b-roll of this pretty miniatures, while...
And contractually obliged to say this, and thank you very much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. And make sure to check out the link below.
If you don't check out the link, Lucas is not getting fed for 2 weeks. Check out the link.